Welcome back to Body Liberation for All. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the vibrant world of African cuisine with a special guest. I'm super excited to have her on. I have been trying to explore things that I may have lost because of colonization. And on that long list of things that we have lost is our connection to traditional foods. And since presumably almost everybody who's of African descent in the US who descended from enslaved people came from somewhere on the west coast of Africa, I've basically been exploring cuisine from the entire west coast of Africa, but I'm still a novice. So super excited to have Kukwa on today. And because we're going to have some visual references in this episode, I want you to know that you can check out the podcast on YouTube, along with a growing library of videos we're making for you. Just like Body Liberation for All, the mission is to promote the health and happiness of queer folks of color and to try and help providers who want to be better hosts for us as well. So if that is something that you would like to tap into, do not forget to subscribe. And if you want to see some of the things we're talking about in this episode, be sure to check out the YouTube video. So welcome to the show, Kukwa. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I have had quite an exciting couple days. I was in Florida. It was nice and very hot. And came back yesterday, and it's about 50 something up here in central New York. So I am not happy. But other than that, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's a pretty major temperature difference. So you've been doing a good bit of travel because we met recently at
Yep.
NGLCC, which is the
Mhm.
National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, essentially. And you can tell from the name that it's been around for a while because the name doesn't really sound like it's including all of the
Right.
rainbow, but
Mhm.
that's just because it's been around for a while. But it was really exciting to be in a place with so many entrepreneurs, so many queer entrepreneurs. But I was a little surprised at how little focus there was in the content on passion. My assumption was that a lot of us start our businesses because there's something we're passionate about that we want to share with others. But it really had more of a large business focus, which
Mhm.
generally in capitalism, big businesses exist to make money. There was a need in the market and they seized it. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with passion.
Passion. Yeah.
But when you were talking about what you do, it clearly started with passion. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to the United States, even, and then becoming a self trained chef? I'm so impressed by all self trained everything because it's obviously a legitimate way to build skills, but it's something that I think a lot of us are afraid to even attempt because maybe we've been a little held back by public schooling or traditional schooling kind of leaves you feeling like you can't do anything without an official guide.
Yeah. So initially came to the US to join my mother and her brother who was doing a PhD at Ohio State. And so my mom is an RN, retired RN, and so she was at Mount Carmel in Columbus, Ohio. So that's how we ended up in the US. She had been living away from us since I was 4. And so I'd been raised by my grandmother, her mother. So came to the US. When we first came, I realized my mom was making friends mostly through her nursing colleagues and some other immigrants who were either nurses or in home health care. And so she spent quite a bit of time with them, you know, sometimes on the weekends, but not always, but definitely at Thanksgiving and at Christmas and any other major holiday like Labor Day or Memorial Day, cooking African, Filipino, Ethiopian, you name it. We had all the different dishes in the house. And so that kind of sparked my interest in feeding other people because I was not I wasn't trained. I didn't go to school for that, because as an immigrant daughter, you went to school to become a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer, or even better if you went into banking, right? So I got interested in cooking for others and feeding others through all those different potlucks that we were holding. And eventually people started asking us for catering. And so my mom and I got an extra stove and put it in the garage, which was probably illegal, but we did it and started cooking for catering. Nothing big, like people who were going abroad and wanted to have like a little fundraiser, people who were taking their students to Ghana who wanted the students to get a taste. So we did a little bit of that. And then I moved out to Indiana to work for Notre Dame. So once I got there, I got sort of I infiltrated the Black community. So there was a lot of students of color who had very little knowledge of Africa. And so I cooked every weekend and had them over in my apartment because I lived in the dorm. And so that's how that part got started. I left Indiana to California to do my second master's. And while I was there, I started catering, paying for my rent through little side jobs and then cooking classes. So that's how it all started, just slowly, slowly building. And then 7 years ago, I decided I was leaving higher ed. I'd worked in higher ed about 25 years and I was going to start my own business. I did it for 2 years full time, mostly on loans and credit cards. And then I fell. So I had an accident and while I was carrying some pots and could not walk for 3 months. So had to put the business on hold, went back to higher ed, and that's how come I ended up in New York, in central New York. So it's been a journey of, getting to this point of doing it full time and legally, like being an LLC, actually about to convert into an S Corp. So it's kind of gone through its iterations, and we came to the U.S. in 1996. So it's I think about 27 years of just playing with the idea, going into higher ed, teaching, doing the things that were sort of respectable by the immigrant parent standards, right? And then finally going, this is what I really want to do is work for myself, and I want to work for myself feeding people. And that's really where my passion is like if someone says, thank you, that was the best meal I've had. Thank you, that was so comforting. My job is done. It's just I feel so good. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Well, what did your parents say? Or what did, I don't know if there was one parent who's more focused on their vision for what you should do professionally in the States.
Yeah.
Since you did give their path a chance, were they more on board when you said, I'm clearly a full grown person and now I realize I want to do something different? Did they just say, all right, well, we support you?
So my dad passed 20 years ago, actually, 2003 August. So he's been gone a while. And so he never really got a chance to, be a part of our life in the US. He lived in Ghana and never came to the US. So mostly it's been my mom, and she has been focused on the pension, right? So as a registered nurse, she got a pension and she's getting her social security and is able to live a pretty decent, you know, life in her older age because she has those amenities, right? And so that's her biggest problem is like, what are you going to do when you cannot lift the pot anymore, right? What are you going to do? Where's your retirement coming from? So she stresses about that a lot. And, every now and then when things aren't going so well, she's like, are you going to return to higher ed? I'm like, no. So, you know, I think for her, it's really about survival after I can't do what I'm doing anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky thing, especially
Hmm.
when the people that came before us put pressure on us that's based in a desire to protect us, but we
Hmm.
know that maybe our circumstances are a little different. But the pension thing even weighs on me some. In most positions, pension doesn't even exist anymore. But in
Right.
education and in a lot of
Hmm.
government funded jobs, the pensions are as they have been for years and years.
Hmm.
So that is something that I think about when I say I want to go all in with my business. Where did you find the clarity to remain faithful to what gives you joy?
I I can't say I have complete clarity though. I think what has been really helpful and continues to be is that I'm partnered to an amazing woman and she has a full-time job. And so we've kind of traded off. So I had kept my higher ed job until 2 years ago when I went full time. So October 15, 20, whatever, 21, I quit and I went full time business. It was really a rough start because COVID was still in existence. Food gatherings were not a thing. We're not back yet. People were doing catering or takeouts. And so I got into that. But it's been really a blessing to have her by my side because knowing that mortgage is paid and homeowners association is paid and some credit cards are covered and I will never go hungry because she continues to work makes it easier to kind of run along, and do my thing, my passion thing. I think it would have been rougher and I would have borrowed more money. At this point, I don't have any loans, either from the government or from any bank. So I've been running on my cash flow, which is not enormous, but it kind of keeps me going enough that I haven't borrowed anything. And I think a big a big chunk of that is related to her support and being able to just be figuring it out as I go along because that part is taken care of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
was in a coaching program a couple of years ago that was for BIPOC creatives and entrepreneurs. And they talked about safety
Hmm.
being crucial to giving you the freedom to explore your passions. And
Hmm.
it's something that, if you're from a working class family, a lot of us just have to build that sense of safety. And we have to acknowledge that's something we have to take out the time to create. So, a lot of blockages that I kept hearing people in that cohort talk about, they blame themselves for, like, oh, I don't believe enough, or my mindset's off and I'm not willing to go all in. But safety was an issue, whether it was financial safety or some other fear of being verbally abused or something because you pursued your passion, which you would think that food should be neutral. It's something we all need to live, but it absolutely isn't neutral. It can be really politicized. We hear a lot about European cuisine, but it's very rare that we see African cuisine featured. And I would think that maybe you've gotten pushback about your choice of cuisine. Have you experienced that? Or what is your interaction with the market been like?
It has depended on where I was. So with being initially in Ohio, we had a good following. We focused on doing traditional meats, so goat and lamb. We did chicken occasionally, but not always. And then we offer three vegetarian options. Ohio was rough because I think are, there were then about 6 or 8 Ethiopian restaurants. There were a couple Ghanaian restaurants and other like Senegalese and such. We were very much working to appeal to the non African. And so the people who were interested and wanted to explore the cuisine but weren't sure how to access them, especially since some of the neighborhoods were not the best parts of town. And so your average white American was not going to enter those neighborhoods not knowing what they were going to do, right? Or what they were getting themselves into. So we were downtown at a deli that was pretty frequented by a lot. It was diverse, but most of our customers ended up being Caucasian customers. we did not we weren't able to move forward in Columbus, mostly because we weren't we weren't able to get our own space. And a result of that was people's attitudes towards African food. So a lot of people who we were approaching for space were like, this is the stuff you find on MLK Boulevard, which everybody knows MLK Boulevard is where the Black people are, right? No matter where you are, if the city, that street has been renamed, you know that's where the brown folks are, right? So in their head, even one person said, we're not sure the kind of people you're going to attract, right? And I called him out on it, and he was like, oh, I don't mean it that way, blah, blah, blah. And so it was really, really sad that we kept being met with roadblocks after roadblock after roadblock. We also tried out for a food hall, which in retrospect was definitely not my passion and not where I wanted to go. But in the moment, it felt like we needed a space to get our name out, to get the word out, and to be in a central location where we were able to reach a different crowd of people than our own other African people who for the most part aren't eating out, right? So most of us know how to cook. So we cook at home. If we eat out the grilled tilapia or the thing that we can't do at home. So that's also sort of the downside. Like we're not feeding Africans because they're cooking their own stuff, right? We were met with different at different points with different roadblocks. We have done well in Ithaca, I think, because the population is diverse, it's well traveled. I cannot tell you how many people I've met who have been to Ghana, been to Senegal, Togo, Benin. So they're well traveled, they are very curious people, and they are very accepting. And so we've done really well here and are contemplating our own space. Possibly it's going to happen. I think the curiosity is there here, whereas we didn't have it the last two places where we've been. And that has prevented us from moving forward and becoming our own little space downtown, or you know what I
Right.
mean? A more
Yeah, that's
central
really
location.
interesting. I think with a lot of things, sometimes you can think, oh, well, maybe my idea just won't work, but what if it's just the wrong place?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
a pretty important lesson. You mentioned a lot of different countries. Now, does your so the name of your business is Ascent, I'll let you say it.
A Sempe kitchen. So a Sempe means curiosity in my language, which is Fanti, which is from Ghana, West Africa. So it's not a language that's spoken anywhere else on the West Coast, unlike Hausa or, you know, Igbo or, other languages. Swahili, for example, is spoken in a few countries. Fanti is very, very, central to the central region of Ghana.
Hmm. So that's
Yeah.
one of the unaffected languages by colonization. Like that was a language that was already there. Oh, how exciting. Is that your
Yeah.
only other language?
No, I speak Ghana, which is also coastal, South Ghana, southern Ghana, but very centralized, not spoken throughout the country as much. And then Tree. And Tree is kind of like our language that binds all people. So just about your average person on the street speaks Tree, because it's kind of like, it's not the patois, because we do have our own like mix English and Tree and some other words in there, which right now I'm blanking on. Pidgin. So Pidgin is what it's called. um so we do have that, but I speak Fanti and Ga, which are very like localized, and then Tree, which is kind of like most people can understand it, and even if they don't speak it well, they can get by.
Mm. So while
Yeah.
you were living in Ghana, Were you eating cuisine from neighboring countries? Or, like you mentioned, you said most people from Africa, in your experience, know how to cook. So, what
Yes.
was eating out like? Was that for special occasions or for when you were traveling?
So eating out really only happened for like graduation or birthdays or any, big events, confirmation, those kinds of things. And we would eat out in a probably a traditional Ghanaian restaurant, but it would have like spaghetti, which is technically not Ghanaian. And we could get meat pies, which are kind of like turnovers or empanadas. We could get grilled chicken. So we get things that we wouldn't cook at home, like the grilled tilapia, roasted chicken, those kinds of things we would not cook at home. So if we ate out, that's where we would go. I didn't have Indian, I didn't have Mexican, I didn't have any of those other cuisines until I came to the US. Now, however, that is a different story altogether, right? So globalization has burst on the scene. You can find just about any cuisine in Ghana that you desire. I don't know how authentic they are or how good the food is because I didn't do a whole lot of eating out when I was home this past March. My mom lives in a relatively, oh, I wouldn't call it the ghetto, but it's definitely, not the best part of town. But she moved back 3 years ago. She's coming up in a month for a few months and then she'll be back. She'll be going back. But she lives where my grandmother bought housing, which when she bought was a really nice neighborhood and has kind of gone downhill since then. But she's done renovations, she's put up an electric fence, which has its own issues, right? So it's like we're creating our own little bubble inside of this. And when I go home, I have all these issues, but that's another story. But anyway, so when we were home in March, she has found a caterer who does all her cooking. So my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's and so has not been cooking much because she's shaky on her left side. And so this woman did all our cooking while we were there, which created a sort of ease for us because we didn't really cook while we were home, which is rare for me because when I get home, I want to cook because now I have access to ingredients I don't have in the US. So I want to try my hands at things that I couldn't do here. But I didn't do any cooking. I think I boiled an egg and I heated food, and that must have been the extent of my cooking when I was in Ghana in March. But that's because now we have our own, personal caterer, thanks to mom. But for the most part, I would have been more adventurous if I didn't have that, you know, meals prepared for me. I would have gone out and eaten Indian and eaten, Senegalese and eaten, whatever else was available. But we didn't do a whole lot of eating out because of, having food catered to
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
Well, I see a part of your business is also educating people on how they can create these dishes at home. What are some of the main things that you focus on in classes that would help people kind of get their feet wet with Ghanaian cuisine?
So most of the stuff that I teach cooking lessons on are things you can easily acquire. So I try not to teach on things that you cannot find,
Right.
like, snails or, stuff that we use at home. Crab, the small red crab, not the big Dungeness crab that everybody's so excited about. And snails and like guinea fowl and, just forest meat, right? So those are things that are not easily accessible, for example. So I would teach on peanut stew because
Mm.
peanut is readily available. You can put in any kinds of veggies that are available to you. You can put in any kind of meat that you would like. I also teach on red, which is black eyed peas with plantains. Those are
Mm.
easy to find. Black eyed peas, just about any grocery store should have them in the bean section. We use olive oil instead of red palm oil because there isn't a a sustainable way to harvest right now. I found something at Wegmans, which is kind of like our Whole Foods here in Ithaca, but it's like this big for $10 because it's sustainably harvested. And I support it when I have to, but on a regular, I prefer to cook with olive oil because it's more accessible to the average person.
Is there a big taste difference there? Is there a reason why? Oh, okay.
There is a big taste difference. So when I can, I offer it to them as a garnish. So I would buy it from Wegmans and then I would give them maybe like a tablespoon of it to kind of put over the top of their sauce, whatever they've just cooked. That initially requires palm oil. So like contomere, for example, requires palm oil, which is our spinach dish. And technically the spinach dish is taro leaves. It's not spinach like the baby spinach we have in the US. It's taro leaves, which I cannot acquire unless I ship or get it from a wholesaler, which I'm not cooking that large of a quantity to make it worth the shipping. We cook okra, which is also readily available, not fresh because most Americans are quite squeamish about slimy food. And so I get the frozen version, which makes it less likely to get slimy because by the time you're done cooking, you have not extracted all of the slime from it.
Ah, okay.
So I love the we call it ma. I love that look and that feel and that taste that comes with the okra when it's fresh and finely chopped. And that's my dad's ethnic group. That's our traditional dish. And I love it. But I only offer it to those who are like, yeah, bring on the okra. But like the average person is like, I'm not so sure about this,
So the
right?
traditional
So
dish has more of that like
yeah,
mucilaginous texture.
yes,
Okay. I
yep.
know that's good for you, but I never thought of it as like a universally American thing that we might be weird about slimy foods. But yeah, that sounds pretty accurate.
Yes. So we'll do okra, we'll do red, which is the black eyed peas. I do spinach sometimes, and I explain to them where they can get the taro leaves if they want. Sometimes the Chinese markets will have them, the Asian markets, and sometimes you can order it online. And then we have something called a goosey, which goes in with the spinach, and then that becomes a goosey stew. So a whole nother dish. A goosey can be found online. It's super expensive, but it's also available. What else do I cook? I cook alicha, which is actually an Ethiopian dish that my mom taught me. So mom lived in Ethiopia for her nursing school. Her dad used to be an ambassador, and so they grew up in Ethiopia. And so she cooks Ethiopian foods and taught me a couple of them. So I cook alicha, which is easy. It's cabbage, potatoes, carrots, bell peppers, and red onion in a curry base. So yeah, those are probably the basic things I teach. I'll teach more traditional things when people come home. So I have a lesson at home for three or less people, 1 to 3 people. And because I can control that a lot better than a group of 12 or 15, I can do the more expensive ingredients because I don't have to buy a lot of them and I can show them if they're curious different things.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so
Yeah.
cool. You mentioned
Yeah.
when you were in Ohio that you were connecting to a lot of the Black American students there that were really curious about African cuisine. Have you seen how meaningful it can be for people to connect to food that It's not exactly the same at all, but we do see a lot of parallels in African American cuisine. You can tell that the people who first created these dishes came from West Africa because people found similar produce to recreate comfort dishes from home. Like, what
Hmm.
have you noticed in those clients, like how meaningful a class with you could be?
So, unfortunately, here in Ithaca, don't, I, I could probably count on one hand all 7 years how many African American folks have actually like approached me to do a class. So they
What?
might
Why?
try
What
the
was the difference
food.
in Ohio? That's so strange.
No, Indiana. So those were my students at Notre Dame. So there was a very controlled group, and they were
Uh,
very. I think they were just curious in learning more. But Ohio, I probably had one or two that I recall. And here, even in Ithaca, I'll get a couple students from Cornell, but they are African. I rarely get African Americans or Black Americans, depending on how you want to identify, approaching me for a class or a lesson. So that's fascinating. Yeah, cuz we always think about what could we do differently to outreach to our siblings that don't identify as African or Afro-Caribbean. What are we not doing? How are we marketing? How can we market differently? Do we just cut our losses and be like, okay, we're here. If you want, you can try us. If not.
that is really curious. I wonder. It with so many things with business because at least in the US anyway, every resource you read is focusing on the white consumer. So you don't find a lot of information about how to really reach a Black American audience. And then on the rare occasions that you do, it's usually so offensive that you're like, if this is true, I don't even want to use it or believe it. Like, I read something horrible. It was one of those things where, like, something gets published that was originally internal in a company. And it basically was saying, oh, you can give this demographic a product of any level of quality, meaning save all the money you want, give them the cheapest thing, charge a markup. That they don't have a lot of options because of transportation and what parts of town they're in. And all you have to do is be personable. It was like there in writing that you just have to be kind of nice. And there tends to be a lot of loyalty in this demographic once you get them in. Unless something really bad happens there, people are going to just keep coming back. And I hate to believe that, but I also know the town that I work in during the day, that seems to be true. A lot of people are paying over what is a normal fee for things in their neighborhoods. And if I go shopping or run an errand on a lunch break, I'm like, this isn't happening. I'm going to go shopping when I go back home. But it seems like businesses are booming and they don't really seem to be doing that much for their customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, we're obviously not a monolith. So it's like, how do we market to such an extremely diverse group of people?
Yeah. I think, I mean, what I have struggled with, and I also hate to believe is true, is that we are not a curious people. Even my own Africans right now come to my stall and are very upset that I don't do meat anymore, right? So now we're solely plant based, mostly because meat is expensive and meat requires more astringent. Stringent? Yeah, stringent. I think. I was an English major and I'm always concerned about using the right word. More just more particular storage and cooking and temping and that kind of stuff. And also because I believe that plant-based allows everybody to access it. So even if you wanted meat, you could go home and put the meat in it and still enjoy it, right? But if I put meat in it, the person who only eats plant based cannot pull it out. So that's been my journey the last 5 years of just focusing on plant based and using vegetables in the stews, like the peanut stew, for example, has cabbage and sweet potatoes and those kinds of things. Sometimes not at market, because market is like farmers market is it's such a quick turnaround. Like, we pay for the kitchen we're in, and so we're in and we're out. And it just has to be a very quick, efficient way of doing things. And so we don't get to like boil potatoes and chop them up and put them in and all the things that we could do when we have a smaller class or a lesson that I like to do. Like, I put sweet plantain in the peanut stew if we're home and we have access to it. So there's lots of diversity of vegetables when we're able to do that. At market is completely a different beast.
I
But
wonder
I
if there's a
found,
connection
yeah.
there. Like, I wonder if curiosity goes down as stress
Hmm.
levels go up or something, because otherwise I can't, just off the top of my head, understand why that might be so. But I will
Yeah.
say I was literally complaining about that to a coworker before this call,
Yeah.
because someone had mentioned my mom is not American. I mean, she's a naturalized citizen, but her food culture is still that of her parents, which was Jamaican
Mm.
and Cuban. And so there are a lot of Southern dishes I'm not familiar with. Maybe I've seen them before, but never eaten them, or I don't know how to make them. And the people in the office were making a big deal out of me not having tried some Southern dish. But then when I tried to explain, well, that's really not the food culture of the house I was raised in, and no one was really interested in hearing what that might have been. And I
Mm.
find that's a pattern. And then I wonder, how much information are they missing out on because they
Right.
seem pretty insular, like very into
Yeah.
their own
Mhm.
experience and not
Mhm.
into learning about other people's experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's part of the trauma that it is to be melanated and in the United States. Is that where the
Right.
curiosity went? I find it
Mhm.
strange, but my grandmother always said that curious people are the happiest. Life is long. You think it's short until you get older and you're like, oh, it's
Yeah.
still going. As you said, if you're not interested in learning new things, like, what are you going to do with all this
What are you gonna
time?
do with the time? Absolutely. Yeah, I wonder that too. Is it really just the inability to consider anything outside of your comfort zone, right? Because I mean, there are people who will stop by and think we're Jamaican and will want to have Jamaican food, which is fascinating because I feel like Jamaican food is also different, but it's probably closer because rice and beans and chicken and plantain, and but it's different because there's ackee and saltfish, and there are things that I think are just as different as African cuisine is. So I find it really fascinating, and it's mind-boggling that I cannot get my own siblings to try the food when I'm I'm so passionate about sharing this with everybody.
That is so relatable and a little heartbreaking. If you
Yeah.
have a breakthrough and you're like, "Oh, I did this thing," and then, like, all the Black people started coming in, you have to let me know, because I
Okay.
feel like I am crystal clear on who I want to serve. But if
Hmm.
I'm honest, 90% of my business is not coming from my imagined target.
Target,
And so
right.
I'm like, at what point do you just say, okay, well, the market has showed me who really wants to work with me, and I
Hmm.
double down? Or, well, I'm
Keep
not going to do
trying.
that. But I sometimes wonder, like, is that the more sensible thing to do? But I'm letting my passion lead.
Hmm.
And I feel like at some point I'm going to figure out what are the barriers. I think there's probably barriers there that I just haven't fully understood yet.
Mhm.
Maybe. I don't know. I'll report back if I figure anything out because I am
Okay.
fascinated by learning about anything that has to do with the continent. And I thought that that was a very common Black American thing, but maybe not.
I don't think so. I think there are vestiges of the African booty scratcher, for lack of a better term, concept, right? That's still in people's minds. There is definitely more of a movement towards accepting Africa, and a lot of Black Americans I know have moved back home. Like a good chunk of my friends when I was in Ghana, when I was living in Ghana 10 years ago, were African Americans that had moved there, and friends who were Ghanaian that had lived abroad and had come back.
Oh. For half
So
a
I know
second,
that.
didn't Ghana threaten to take us back? I remember, I don't know if this was in the 90s or something, but
Yeah,
it was a popular thing. I don't know how accurate it was. You know how they take small clips of the news, and this was pre-internet. But I remember hearing that some announcement had been made by somebody official in Ghana that like,
yeah.
come on back home, like we've got the visas for you if you want to come back. You don't have to prove that this is exactly where you're from, but you can come on back and like start your life here. And then I wondered, like, what happened to that?
So actually, year of return might have been 3 years ago now. So it's recent. So you might have heard that in the 90s as well, but more recently they're actually granting visas and citizenship to African Americans, I think, and Jamaicans. So you can return, buy land, get started on a business if that's what you want to do, find a job. I'm not saying it's going to be easy because it's a very different culture. And at least from my experience of the Black Americans I was hanging out with, it was not easy because it was a big culture shock. Things were a lot slower. Things are sadly based on bribes. And so people do things for you that they should do normally as part of their job description, but only after you buy them lunch or you buy them dinner or give them something for their taxi fare or whatever they want to frame it as, right? So a big part of the culture is based on that quid pro quo, right? I don't know what the word is, but anyway, the culture is based on that. And so for them it was a big shock, like to go to the passport office and wait in line for 4 hours because somebody took a 2 hour lunch break, or so there are things that don't work for the system here and would never fly, that kind of go unnoticed or unquestioned in Ghana. And so it was a big culture shock because you don't just go get your permit and build your land. You go and you visit the chief and you tell the chief why you want to build land, and the chief gets a cut, and the chief's assistant gets a cut. And it's very convoluted. And I think coming home and coming to Ghana and expecting that things are going to be pretty straightforward and pretty like the US is a misconception. And so I saw that in their faces a lot of the time. Oh my god, I can't believe I spent 4 hours wherever, fill in the blank, and I still didn't get anything done. And I bought somebody lunch. So it's really rough. So yeah, the gates are open, come on over, but it's a big culture shock. And people need to be aware what, like, they need to reframe their mindset when they're walking in the door, because it's definitely not the US. It may be globalized, like everybody's wearing cut off jeans or torn up pants or whatever you see here in the US. The music is similar, R&B and hip hop, and we have our own hip life, and we have our own music as well. But a lot of things are globalized, but the culture, like the very sort of the the mainline culture is still very laid back and very
Yeah, that would
almost,
definitely take some getting used to.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
pace. Well, what
the
is
pace.
queer acceptance like in Ghana? Like, is
Oh
there
my
marriage
God.
equality?
No. So there's actually a law on the books that they're hoping to pass that says you can turn your neighbor in. So we are going back to the 40s and 50s in the US, mostly as a result of Christianity and a result of the mega churches in the US that are influencing the smaller churches in Ghana. So the law, I honestly don't know where it's at. A friend of mine, Carolyn, works for an LGBT organization that hands out grants to other LGBT small businesses. And so she was the one who was keeping me abreast with the law that was trying to go into effect. But I don't know where it's at. I know that maybe a year ago when I went in March, the LGBT center had just been raided. People had been put in jail and some people had been hurt. I think there's a vibrant movement in Ghana of LGBT folks, but there's also people who are very scared and unwilling to come out and be part of the community because they don't want to lose their jobs or housing or whatever. Like my mom won't tell anybody about us. And it's really sad. Like she doesn't even have us on her mantle in the living room because she doesn't want to have to explain that to anybody. And she said to me a couple times, you know, the neighbor down the road just went to jail. And I don't know if it's the same neighbor or if it's a different neighbor, but she's like, I don't want that to happen to you, especially when you're just visiting. So she won't tell anybody, which is really sad, because she doesn't get to rejoice in her oldest child being in a pretty solid, healthy relationship. So that is kind of sad. Sad. I'm sad for her, to not be able to rejoice in that.
But it wasn't
Yeah.
difficult for her to be affirming. She's just aware of the political environment.
I think it was difficult in the beginning. So I came out at 26 or 20, yeah, somewhere in that vicinity. And a lot of it was trial and error, mostly with my best friend who at the time we were both in grad school in different cities. And so she and I were hanging out and experimenting, and my mom found us one day and she was mortified. And so that was her journey in that direction. I ended up dating a guy who tragically passed in a motorcycle accident. And I think after that accident, mom thought it was a reaction to that, the accident, that I was going back to women. But I've been with my partner for 5 years, and I feel like at this point, she's like, okay, maybe she's not going back to men, and it's okay. So she's had her own journey as well, and I think has been, over the years, has been working it out, working it through. She belongs to a church now that is not accepting, and so she will not tell them either. Yeah, so a little bit of that. There's a little bit of sadness around the hiding, but it's really her choice and her life. So that's the way I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, family can be it it's just complicated
Yes.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yes, it
Oh,
is.
well, tell me about your journey as an entrepreneur navigating chronic illness. I wanted to cover that for a little bit because you mentioned we had a little bit of back and forth getting this on the books, and you had mentioned that you have MS. So, how long have you known that you have it, and how does that affect your relationship with such a physical job?
Yeah. So with the MS situation, which I call it a situation because I was diagnosed 5 years ago, and then I was told that the case was complicated and I didn't check all the tests that weren't positive in the right direction, and so I didn't have it. And then I had it again by another doctor. So it's just been back and forth, back and forth. Symptoms are there. Everything that is in the book, in the textbook, is there. But we haven't been able to get a confirmed diagnosis. And so I haven't been able to start treatment because with the healthcare system the way it is, they want the doctor to check all the different boxes before they will actually start treatment. So I've been living with pain and just, losing memory and all kinds of other little things that are not so little in when you put them all together. So that's been rough. It's hard some mornings because I cannot get out of bed and get moving, and I have to start market around 4 a.m. Like I have to start preparing for market around 4 a.m. So, some days are really difficult. And I also worry about the end game, like my mom worries about me and my retirement. Like, when does it get to the point where I can't function anymore? And when do I give it up? And what do I do when I give it up? So I do think about that a lot. And, talking about chronic illness, I also suffer from bipolar disorder. So it's really a mix of the two things and just trying to figure out how best to live life and to still rejoice in life and to still move and wake up and want to do what I really want to do, which is cook and feed people when my body is like, nope, not today. So it's quite challenging, and especially when it's invisible. It's just like most people see me and they're just this bright, wonderful person that they see. They don't realize how many. I always tell people, do you know the spoon analogy? Like how many spoons it takes? Yeah, so they don't realize how many spoons it takes to get to that wonderful person that they meet at the conference or wherever, for example. But yeah, invisible disability is huge for me. I love to talk about how to support other creatives who are going through that. And also, I don't mind talking about it because I feel like the more we talk about it, the less stigma there is and the less people who are in the closet about it, about their own chronic illness or invisible disability, are able to feel more accepted and open
Yeah,
about it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the
Hmm.
lessons that you've learned about hanging on to that joy, like you said, and not feeling like your body is an enemy because it's still your best ally, even when it doesn't do what, we want it to do?
Yeah. So I think for me, what brings me the most joy is is feeding people, but feeding my partner, for example, because she loves everything I cook. And I could be on my worst day and still fix something. And she's like, "Ooh, honey, this is so good. Babe, this is amazing." And so it just brings me so much joy, yes, but also like encouragement to keep
Mhm.
moving, because I know that she is always there and she will always be there to support and to like encourage and just be like, okay, it's time to get up, especially in the winter when it's really hard up north and the depression just kind of feels like it's never going to end.
Right.
So she is very supportive in helping me work out the days when my spoons are just not, non-existent or
Right.
are depleted completely. So she is a rock star. She is one of the most important people in my life, and so she gives me the encouragement, the joy, and the wherewithal to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you tell other people, like what they should know about being more supportive of people living with invisible disabilities? Because I do find especially in more liberation focused spaces, people want to stop letting capitalism just destroy our bodies and the
Mhm.
bodies of everybody on our team. But then they also feel that pressure to never stop working. But with some people, if they try to make themselves do that, then they're completely incapacitated for weeks at a time.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
what would you tell somebody trying to figure out how to be a better ally to people who are not fully able bodied?
I think being an ally to anybody or any group of people that you're not a part of is a lot of work. And I think that most people don't get into it knowing how much work it is. They just think, oh, it's just not talking bad about Black people or not touching their hair or, whatever your baseline is, right? So I think a lot of folks think that's the first step. And maybe that is the first step, but most people don't know that there's more to that and you go deeper and deeper. And when we're not in a room, you stand up for us, right? So that's the next step, perhaps. And then using your own body as a block, for example, if you're in a situation where you need to do that, right? But I think being an ally requires more work than most people are aware of or able to provide. And so the challenge is knowing yourself and knowing what you're capable of doing, I think. So working hard to teach yourself about the illness or teach yourself, like my partner, for example, like when we first got together, she was so scared, was like, oh my god, it's night and day, this person that I know like turned into this other person. And I'm like, it's the same person, honest to goodness, right? But there's a lot of education that went into building this relationship, and going to therapy and talking about it and me journaling and sharing the journals with her. So I think it requires definitely some education, pushing yourself beyond your own comfort zone, and also not 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 always like speaking for us. Like there are moments where you can do that and you're required and you're called on to be an advocate. But I think we know the best story of our lives. And so you not speaking for us is one big lesson to learn as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think it is probably beyond our comprehension sometimes how much different lived experiences change your needs. And you don't
Mhm.
have a way of anticipating it. You really have to hear it from somebody who's been walking that path. And
Mhm.
I have Graves' disease, which is of the autoimmune disorders I could have, I would say, it's not that bad. But when I'm in a flare, the fatigue can be so bad, it gets boring, honestly, waiting to get better. And so the
Mhm.
temptation
Mhm.
is to become productive again, which
Mhm.
everybody around you reinforces because they're like, oh, yeah, you got
Right.
to get out of bed because if you just lay there, you're not going to get better. But depending on what you have, if you get up, then you're not going to get better. Like
Right.
sometimes you
Right.
actually just have to lay there.
Lay there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. I think this is
Mhm.
another area where a lot of us need more exposure. So thank you for being visible and sharing the bipolar diagnosis because I think it's way more common than a lot of people realize, but a lot of
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
just don't feel safe enough to disclose.
Disclose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Probably
That's
based on a
very
lot of
true.
bad experiences, not just something they
Right.
read about.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actual lived experience. Oh, well,
Yep.
can you tell everybody where we can find you? Because I'm hoping soon that maybe you'll be releasing maybe cooking tutorials or a cookbook or something. So we want to keep up in case that happens.
Okay. So right now, just mostly online. Asempa Kitchen African Food on Facebook and Asempa Kitchen with an underscore in between Asempa and Kitchen on IG, and then our website, which is www.asempakitchen.com. I don't have anything in the works yet. I have done online classes during COVID, and I'm open and willing to do them again. I just have to have people who want to do them. So if you're interested, let me know. Once this airs, if there are more people interested, you can gather a few people and we can go from there. So I'm always willing to do them.
That is actually a really, really good idea. I am going to make myself a note. I keep hearing about, I technically work in food service adjacent. We won't, like it's, I won't even go down the road too deep, but people are always talking about trying to make our menus more inclusive. But nobody ever says anything about the entire continent of Africa.
Of
I'm
Africa.
like, that's a very big continent. So I don't understand how none of these countries' cuisines are coming up at
hmm
all.
hmm hmm
So yeah, I'm gonna keep that in mind that you can do virtual
Yeah.
classes if people are ready to
hmm
book.
Yeah, I can.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing some of your story with us. If you had one thing that you could say and people would understand it and internalize it forever, like, do you have a final parting piece of wisdom you want to share with everybody?
I think I would say whenever you're invited by someone else to eat, someone other than your ethnic group or your community to eat their food, I think you should. You should always stretch yourself to try something new.
Yeah. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was nice talking to you as well.